Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Renate McNay and my guest today is Dr. Manjir Samanta-Laughton. Hello, Manjir.
Hi.
Now, Manjir was with us before on Conscious TV with her first book, Punk Science, Inside God's Mind, and we had such a great response and invited her back. And today we talk about the second book, The Genius Groove. Great title.
Thank you.
But what is it?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
The Genius Groove is really a companion book to Punk Science because people were always asking me, it's all very well talking about cosmology and black holes and all that stuff we talked about in the first interview.
Mm-hmm.
What does it actually mean for my life? You know, how can I actually use it? And also I was finding in my own life story, that I'd gone from sort of failing exams to, sort of being, obviously I trained as a doctor, but I wasn't, superlative. I wasn't winning medals as a doctor. To suddenly everybody around the world saying, "Oh, she's a genius. She's this, she's that," and I knew the process that I went through in order to get into my genius groove. And I thought, well, using the principles of science that I've discussed in the first book, I can actually start to spell it out for people, how they too are a genius and how they can get into their genius groove.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about who you were before you ended up in the genius groove.
Well, I guess like a lot of people who are on this planet right now, who may have within them something to express, I was, doing what I thought I should be doing. I went to med school, and my parents are both doctors, so I was doing the right thing by society. I even married a doctor, and we had a house near London, and we had this sports car, and to me though it didn't really mean anything. It wasn't really the essence of who I was.
But on an emotional level, you had a little bit a difficult path. Yeah, you were a lot of pushed by your parents. It was your parents who wanted you to study medicine, and I like to know more about your emotional side.
Yeah. So I didn't have a very good time in medical school. For various reasons. One, because even though my parents had wanted me to go, and I myself actually wanted to go at that point. I worked really hard, and I got into one of the London teaching hospitals, and from the very first lecture I knew that was not where I wanted to be.
Right.
And the very first lecture is the Dean's address.
Yes.
And because my roommate, who I'd only just met, was actually ill that day and I was helping her, I actually walked in late because I was helping this roommate of mine, and he just looked at me like, the Dean, like, how can you be late for the first lecture? And I thought, uh-oh, and that really set the tone. And I just knew I was not in the right place, and this is such a big thing for me because it was, well, haven't I wanted to be here all my life? Haven't people been saying to my parents that from as little as 2 years old, I can remember people saying that I should become a doctor because I had a very calm temperament, even as a child. And then suddenly to find out that it's not what you want.
But did you know at that time what you would like to do?
No. I really, it threw me into turmoil. And I remember very clearly noticing that the way that I walked was no longer purposeful. And I felt that all the purpose had gone from my life. And I was walking towards my medical school one night, and I noticed just how slowly I was walking towards it. And I thought, I used to walk fast. What happened to me? And I tried to make myself walk quickly towards it, and I couldn't. It was, my being did not want to go towards that place.
So it's like your aliveness was
Yes,
compromised.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think a lot of people are in this situation where
yeah.
they're doing what they feel they have to do, what is necessary for them,
Or how they earn money.
and how they earn
Yeah.
money, absolutely.
So as you say in your book, basically our society is about survival.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of
So we compromise our being. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think through my journey, a lot has opened up for me, which we can go into, where slowly over the years of me going for what I really is in my heart and surrendering to my purpose here, my genius groove.
Yeah.
I've found that actually the universe is very abundant.
Yeah.
And it's tapping into that place and flowing with it that is important. But at that time I didn't know any of that. All I knew was that I was extremely confused and feeling very lost. And so that's around that time when I had a Kundalini experience on top of everything, which we discussed in the last interview. And as someone who was very, very sceptical to start off with, I didn't understand what, I'd never heard of a Kundalini experience. I vaguely knew about psychics, very vaguely. To me, that they were not even a topic to really be discussed. I vaguely knew about complementary therapies.
So what happened in this experience? What did you do in this moment?
What did I do? Well, a lady, a student, and a fellow medical student, went to a freshers' fair in the Student Union in London, and she was across the room, and she said, "Oh, there's a free yoga class. Do you want to join?" I said, "Okay." You know, I wasn't even signing up myself. This is how the universe works. It does it for you if you're in the flow. And so I went, okay. So I turned up that night, and she dropped out, and she went to a karate evening. So I said, well, I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to commit. And as I turned up in sort of jogging pants, because I thought we were going to be doing exercises. But as soon as I came into the room, I knew I was meant to be there. And for someone who had never used that language before, there was a sense of coming home and a sense of familiarity. Which was weird for me, because I was a very sort of scientific, materialist scientist, type, at that point. Even as a teenager, that's what I was interested in. And the guy who was running the group got us to do some meditations, and he had a video of his guru. And so through the video, I think the idea is the guru was transmitting the Kundalini awakening. And I don't think it happens to everyone, but for me, who had no concept of what this was, it worked. And I had a feeling of absolute union, and it went on for quite a few days. I can't actually recall what happened in those few days.
So when you say union, what were you in union with?
It was like my mind was in touch with the whole mind of the universe. Like, if my mind was water and it filled up the room, it would touch every object in this room. So it was that sort of experience that I suddenly knew my connection to everything. And that was pretty radical, from where I was, and suddenly that's how the light was switched on. So I was 18 years old in my first few weeks of medical school, first time away from home, having previously lost my purpose, and then suddenly this was switched on. And as you say, I don't want to give the impression that everything was hunky-dory. I think people do find that when they do have a spiritual awakening, the shadow that needs to come out of them will come out. And that's exactly what happened in the next few years.
Yeah, so I know you had a tough time. You went through a depression, and you lived with your sister, and that was not very easy. And you said you became somehow very disorientated.
Yes, yes. It was not an easy time.
No, especially if you experience
Mm.
oneness, and then you find yourself having to deal with all these little
Yeah.
emotional things.
But I think
Yeah.
that's part of the journey. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
obviously looking back, I can see that that's what was coming up. It was the shadow part of me
Yeah,
to be looked at, to be cleansed,
yes.
to be integrated. And so, and also I learned a lot. I think if you just stay in the oneness and you're just in bliss all the time, you can't actualize in this dimension. And we're here to experience all the dimensions that we're meant to experience, not just the bliss. And bliss is everywhere in every moment anyway. You know, it's when you're going to the supermarket, it's if you're going to a nightclub, if you know, it is even the most difficult situations. Because bliss is in all things, it is there. But it's also, for me, that was a very intense time of spiritually waking up, and it was in that period that I actually connected to my purpose, what I'm really here for. So
Tell us about that.
so I suppose I should, while we're on the subject, just going, because you just mentioned, the situation with, I was living with my sister, and I had a termination. I've talked about this in my book. I had a termination of pregnancy, and so I had a boyfriend at the time. So all of those things, for me, they really shaped my reality as well.
Yes.
Because through the termination, that was the first time I saw an angel.
Yes.
That was the first time I had, because I was feeling racked with guilt about the whole thing.
Yeah, you were saying you were sitting there and you were crying and you were desperate and depressed, and then all of a sudden the space opened up.
Absolutely.
And you saw an angel. So what did you actually see?
It was, oh gosh, because I see a lot, since the Kundalini experience, I see a lot with my mind's eye.
Mm-hmm.
So it's...
Is the mind's eye the third eye?
Yes, you could say that.
Okay.
So, but this was a little bit of that, and I'm not sure if anybody else was in the room, they would see it.
Yeah.
But for me, it was almost like a fine mist of the dimensions opening up, and this sense of a person who is taller than an average person, and sort of light shimmering around them, and the sense of absolute unconditional love.
Yeah.
So I did have difficult times, and my sister at the time was going through difficulties herself, and she was also she was my elder sister, and she did not get into medical school as is expected in our family, and so maybe there's some rivalry. But she started to be violent towards me. We were living together in a family flat. And so I had this for 3 years. And what it did for me, because I was a very timid person at that point. I know it's hard to believe now. But and it made me realise that she'd actually been doing this when we were in... during my childhood as well.
Yes.
So this had actually come out as well. So that there was somebody who told me at the same time this was happening in my childhood. I don't want to sit here and say my sister, blame her and everything, because she ultimately did me the most amazing favour.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because when there was a moment where she was on the other side of a door with a knife saying that she was going to kill me, and that... was a moment where I found myself saying to myself, well, I might as well die because I'm not worth anything anyway. And part of me suddenly was observing my thoughts and saying, well, what am I saying? You know, why am I saying that I might as well die? You know, and I realised just how low my self-esteem was at that point.
Where did that come from?
It was just sort of, you know how sometimes when anybody ruminates on anything, and then suddenly you go, oh, I'm thinking in a certain way, and you just start to become aware of your own thoughts.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a it wasn't like a sort of, it didn't feel like a spiritual insight.
Why did you have so many self-doubts?
You see, I think it might have come from the childhood time.
Yeah.
I can't remember that childhood period of my sister sort of, you could say there was bullying going on.
Yeah.
All I can remember is that I was very afraid of people, you know, when they would sort of come towards me, and there was something that wasn't quite right, and I couldn't quite understand why. Ultimately, I'm actually quite a confident person, and that started to come out, you know, in certain situations. But there was also this sort of not putting myself forward, but that was a type of conditioning that was put on top of that confidence.
Yes. Yeah.
So that sort of low self-esteem came because I repeatedly had thought, I guess you rationalise things. When someone you love is doing something that hurts you, you start to think that you're worthless.
Yeah.
And I think, quite frankly, having been a therapist as well, that's ultimately what many of us think about ourselves. When I've done therapy with people, I think people often come to that point where all the other problems they have come down to a feeling of worthlessness. And so wherever it comes from in people, I think it's quite a common thread in many people.
Sure.
And I definitely had it, and it probably was to do with that childhood period that I can't remember very well. But hearing my thoughts, I was so shocked. And realised...
Hearing your negative thoughts.
Yeah, my negative thoughts.
Yeah.
And realising that I was so ready to just, you know, maybe, I don't think she really would have killed me, but I mean, you know, the fact that I just went, oh, well, I'm not worth anything, shocked me so much. And into switching something on where I was like, no, actually, I'm worth something.
So you think she mirrored something to you which actually started in here?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is what I'm saying, it's not about something, you know, I'm not sitting here saying, oh, my nasty sister, blah, blah, blah. It's something that needed to happen. It really did kickstart me, and I'm grateful for that experience as well, because it's made me change enormously. And things did change after that, after I made that realisation.
Yeah, so what changed after that?
Well, my sister actually started to meditate, and she's very much changed in character. And I also, my life started to move around, you know, so I also met my first husband. And so that's another story, but yeah, so things started to change. My physical reality started to mirror the inner changes. I still had a lot of work to do, but it did start to mirror the inner changes.
And you continued seeing sometimes angels?
Yes, I was still having, ever since that Kundalini experience, just having multidimensional experiences on top of being in medical school.
Yeah, and your parents and your husband became very worried about that?
That's true. So one of the things that happened when I had that Kundalini is I started to feel energy coming out of my hands. And I thought to myself, oh, this could be quite useful to do something with.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I'm from a healing family. So I thought, oh, I could train to, you know, eventually train to be a healer. And it wasn't until I was 25 when I had completed my house jobs, which is the first year of, after you've qualified as a doctor, you do a year of training. You're on the job, but you're still sort of in training. I had married, doctor. I had bought my first property in London, all the things that you're supposed to do. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes,
And
yes.
I'd also secured a 3-year GP post. So my career was pretty much, in the material sense, set out for me. I had security. That's what I thought. Of course, that's just an illusion, but you know, I thought I had security. And I was out in a hospital in Essex, and I was doing an ear, nose and throat job. So it was quite, you know, laid back, as ENT isn't such a busy, you know, specialty sometimes. And so I was in my room and I was watching TV, and Oprah Winfrey was on. And I also had brought the papers back from my home to my, you know, hospital flat. And so I was reading the Sunday papers. And there was an article about a healing modality called plexus bioenergy. And I read the article, I just looked at it, and it was like having a thunderbolt. I just suddenly knew, like, even without reading the article. And on the TV, Oprah was saying, listen to the signs that are in your life. And I was like, she's talking to me. And then I went, no, I can't do this bioenergy stuff. No, I'm not. And Oprah suddenly said again, you may discount these signs, but they really are telling you where to go. And I was like, are you kidding me? So I went along to a seminar, and then eventually trained in plexus bioenergy, which is the healing modality that Michael Flatley also had help from when he suffered from his illness.
Yeah, I saw that on YouTube, a little clip about it.
Yeah. So that's the person who treated Michael Flatley was actually the person who trained me as well. And what I liked about Plexus is that they have a very grounded approach. They teach you how to do Qigong, and you have to pass the Science of Healing test, which is, you know, so always they had an eye for how to present yourself professionally, and, you know, that side of things, you know, because sometimes the healing world can be a bit ungrounded, as we probably would agree. So it was a modality that suited me. So we're getting to when I was about 26, and I was a GP in training. I was also a qualified. I think I was training on top of my paediatrics rotation. I trained to be a plexus bioenergy healer, and so eventually, when I became a GP trainee and a GP locum, I was also, in my secret life, I was doing bioenergy healing. And it was doing that healing that really took me to a new level of multidimensional awareness. So I started to have more visions, I started to have more interconnectedness with, you know, lots of different levels. And I would casually tell my husband about it.
Yes.
I wouldn't tell my colleagues about it. It was I knew very well that my colleagues would see it as something that was you know, akin to insanity, so I kept very quiet.
But your husband thought that as well, didn't he?
I didn't realise this.
Yes.
So gradually my husband and I were going on divergent paths.
Yeah.
And I think quite a few people experience this when one person is sort of waking up spiritually. And at the beginning, before I did my training in bioenergy, it probably was a bit more manageable. It was like a hobby. You know, he probably saw it as a nice hobby on the side. But actually it became, you know, really more who I was. It's anyone who I think has that spiritual awakening, it's not a hobby that you do, it is your vibration.
It's a calling, yeah.
Yeah, it's who you are. You are aware of the many dimensions, and this was just intensifying in me. And
Did you feel very grounded at this time?
Did I feel very grounded?
Grounded.
I did.
You know, I remember in your first book,
Yeah.
in the interview, you talked about that sometimes when we lose ground, we can access easier higher dimensions of reality.
Yes. Yeah, that's something I discovered in my healing clinic, that people who had suffered some trauma, sometimes that's when they get psychic abilities.
Yes.
But I guess because my psychic abilities, my Kundalini, had come through a meditation, and it was kind of like effortless. That the way that I live my life is pretty grounded. I mean, don't forget, I was getting my GP qualifications at the same time. So maybe I was a bit young, and I was in my 20s, and but I think that the groundedness was there. I knew very well that I shouldn't mix the two, that the GP work was the GP work and the bioenergy was separate, and that I should keep that from my colleagues. So I think somebody who isn't grounded perhaps would get the two mixed up, or try and introduce, but there was definitely that distinction in my mind. I knew absolutely. And we haven't talked about the science aspect, but I also was getting very interested in the science. Right from the start, I was
cosmology
interested, absolutely. So at this stage, so this is in my late 20s, I knew that I wanted to have a career as a speaker, as an author, and so I wanted to earn part-time from general practice, and the rest of my time I would want to spend being a speaker, etc. That was the plan.
Yes.
How things happen. Isn't always how you plan it.
But there was an incident before, which I would like to mention, because it's so fascinating, what you went through, and yet here you are, and this very famous punk science lady, that your parents actually tried to section you. That must have been quite painful for you.
That was a huge thing, and the reason why I'm talking about it openly, the reason why I've written it in the book, is because I do want people to know that whatever they're going through, they can get through it too. So you just said, this world famous punk, because sometimes you have to go through a dark night of the soul in order to get onto your true path. So I definitely went through that. It's exactly 10 years ago now. I was, so at that point, I was working as a GP part-time. I was working in my healing clinic. I was already doing talks on science and spirituality. And as I said, I started to realise that, don't forget, medicine is a very intense career. I was working at some points 90, 100 hours a week. I didn't have time to step back and look at my relationship and think, what am I going to do about it? I simply didn't have the time. So I was doing a lot of on-calls, etc. So it was only when I started as a part-time GP that I stepped back and looked at my relationship and went, okay, this isn't working for me. We are really going in divergent paths. So it started a whole period of about 6 months where I was wondering what to do, how to negotiate this marriage, trying to heal the marriage, and gradually realising it really wasn't happening. And eventually I got a nudge in that I met somebody I was very connected with, and out of the blue, it wasn't something that I was intending to do. That turned into a relationship. It was a friend that I, had a very strong connection with, and it was okay. This is definitely this is a nudge the universe was giving me to, get out. This is what how I needed to go. So my parents had been sort of informed about, that my marriage was not going so well. But when I actually did finally make the split, my ex-husband told them about the visions and everything that I'd been having. And my parents being both doctors, and my ex-husband being a doctor, he knew exactly how to put the language so that it would sound like a psychiatric illness. And it was definitely motivated, as he told me later, it was definitely motivated by revenge. Which, is maybe understandable. But so anyway, the three of them started an investigation into my mental health. So because my parents had always known me as a sort of into the science and everything like that, they didn't know anything about my spiritual journey because it all happened since I'd left home. And what I was getting in my multidimensional life sounded pretty bizarre to them, as it would sound bizarre to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I absolutely know that.
Didn't you feel very alone at that time?
Oh, absolutely, extremely alone. I mean, the relationship that I had with this, who was a friend, and he's actually, it came through later, but he's actually something called a twin flame, which is why the connection was so strong. But it wasn't something that was meant to be, it didn't last very long. Some people, they're just in your life to have a purpose, and then they leave. So at one point, exactly 10 years ago, I was without a home, without this new partner, without my ex-husband, without my parents, without a job effectively, because my parents actually went to my GP. And my GP happened to be the one who I had trained with. So the whole of the practice, all the GPs in that practice knew me very well because they had worked alongside me. And of course, they didn't know anything about my private life, the fact that I was a bioenergy therapist or anything, because I kept it from them very successfully. So this was all new to them. So suddenly you have 3 doctors in my family saying that something had flipped and that I'd, something very bizarre was happening. So in any doctor's, mind, alarm bells will start to ring, especially if that doctor is practicing. So I was working as a locum, so, they felt they needed to do something. And so one day in the new place that I was renting, a psychiatrist and a GP turned up on the doorstep. And so I knew what that meant, that because psychiatrists are very hard to get hold of, that they were perhaps preparing to section me under the Mental Health Act. And even though they'd seen me several times and they said I was fine, my father actually called and just asked them to do one more check, and at that point they said, okay. One of the things my parents disliked, obviously they disliked the whole thing about me leaving my husband, who I'd chosen him myself. It was not an arranged marriage, is that I was, the new partner that I was with was not of the sort of caliber that you might say that they could, terribly sorry to say this, but they were quite snobby about him. Sorry to say this, but that's one of the things. That's one of the reasons why they thought I was behaving abnormally. Right. So, because he wasn't of our class, as it were. So, sorry to say this, but that's one of the things that happened.
But actually, you knew that this very situation, also it's very painful, was your making.
That's one of the things that actually totally saved me, because I had done so much learning.
Yes.
Up till that point.
So just to finish that, it didn't happen that you were sectioned.
Yes.
But, I mean, they didn't allow you to leave the country. Yes. They asked you to go on medication. Yes. And so on. But you started to unfold besides of that.
I knew even in the moment, like you're saying, that this terrible situation where a psychiatrist turned up, the GP turned up, they signed me off sick. Yeah. They forcibly said, you can't work. And they also said that I was being referred to the GMC, the General Medical Council, to investigate my mental health. And as a result of that, I resigned from my job because I wasn't sick. So in order to, my work was saying, why are you off sick for so long? We want to have a medical report. And I was like, no, I'm not for a second going to play that game, Because if I do start to give in to this whole concept of I'm sick and take sickness benefits and all that sort of thing, I knew that I would be lost. So I needed to keep the integrity of my own mind. And it meant that I moved back in to my house because I lost my job. And my ex-husband at that point was very sorry for what he'd set off, and we lived sort of estranged for a few years. The General Medical Council, as he said, they came back to me with a letter. I had to go for several psychiatrist interviews.
Checkups, yeah.
And one of the times the psychiatrist actually said to me that I was the sanest person he'd ever come across, which is quite a thing to have on you, you know, in your lifetime. But one of them she'd made up her mind, and she put a report that I probably had a bipolar episode. And so in the end, nobody could find anything wrong with me, but my ex-husband had gone into my computer and taken sort of, you know, channeled information or things that that looks very odd from someone who isn't into all this stuff, you know. And of course I kept it secret from my colleagues, but because I know that it looks very strange to them. That was my private life. So everything in my private life was sent to the General Medical Council, who thought it looked all a bit strange. And so they ended up giving me this letter, and I myself quit from the medical profession.
Yeah.
So I actually told them I wanted to strike myself off.
And then you started to move really into science.
I mean,
and you discovered the black hole principle or theory.
Yes, yeah. So I'd already had this parallel life, which I was a bit shy of talking to people about, actually. It sounds strange now, but you know, I was fascinated by the new physics. I was fascinated by things like string theory, black holes, cosmology. So here I was as a junior doctor. I'd be running up and down it with a little article in my coat pocket. Every time I got a second, I'd be reading about quantum physics and consciousness and, you know, all these amazing things. And I'd already started to go to lectures with the sort of leading people in the field of quantum theory and consciousness. So, you know, I saw people like Peter Russell, and I'd actually started to write my book and sent it off to some publishers who actually showed some interest. But the main thing, as I was saying, is I'd done a lot of emotional work on myself, and I realised that, you know, and this is the important thing, that everything that happens in your life is perfect, is imperfection. And, you know, even the most dire aspects that can happen that feel really intense at the time, as, you know, for example, people coming and, you know, doing, you know, about to section me. And they could, you know, as I said, they didn't find anything wrong, but it was a very intense experience. But part of me knew that the ego self of me had tried to do everything to stop that from happening. I'd gone to all the, you know, appointments that they asked me to do, and it still happened. So at that point I went, this is your higher self doing this. Just keep calm, you know, this is something good is going to come out of it, and I just knew it would be the making of me. Yeah. And it's that emotional resolution where I knew that this was that the person who had manifested this is me from outer space and time, and that this is my shadow self coming up to be visible. Because at the end of the day, I was doubting a little bit. Yeah. You know, thinking, what is all this channeling and things like that, you know? And that little bit of doubt, of course, manifested. I was thinking, is this real? Is this real? You know?
You have a name for that. I have to look it up now. That is the music of hyperspace.
The music of hyperspace.
That everything is in resonance.
Yes.
Yeah, and we only draw or put out what is somewhere in resonance with us.
Absolutely, that's a beautiful way of putting it.
Yeah.
So what was right for my life was coming in, and because I'd already come to those conclusions, both in my own personal healing and in my clinic, I understood that in the moment. And that's how I was able to get through such a horrendous experience. Of course, it was difficult. But it was, even if you have 1% of you that knows that you yourself are creating that experience, that 1% will bring you through. And so I was doing, suddenly I was in the situation where I was in my house again. My ex-husband was leaving me alone because he had created the situation, so he was feeling very guilty. And he was earning the money, and then I was left alone all day to write my book. And nobody was complaining, well, why aren't you going off and getting a job? Because they had created the situation. So that's when things really started to take off for me. I was suddenly invited to speak everywhere, like, you know, all over the country. And it was interesting because, of course, I wasn't earning a lot of money compared to before when I was a doctor. I would always have the money for what I needed. So if I needed to go see, you know, do a talk somewhere, I would have the money to put the petrol in my car. And, you know, it was amazing. I started to realise that a whole new world was opening up for me. Something that was out of the box. And you know, it was a period of surrender where I was going, okay, it's not about what I think I want to do anymore or what the plan was. Do you remember the plan was be a part-time GP and do the work and
have children and
that sort of thing. It was about surrendering to the genius groove and what my highest self, what I'm truly here to do.
Yeah, so would you say the genius groove is guiding us, or how would you see that? How can we know that we are in it, or how do we get in it?
I think that it's that calling within. It's that deep sort of knowing that there's something there for you, and a lot of people suppress it. And
well, I guess it takes also a lot of courage to step into the unknown.
Yes.
You don't know the outcome.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
But so it's really our creative force.
It's the creative force, and it's us coming up to and in dynamic with the universe. So, you know, although the universe, when you're surrendering to the higher self, which I call in Black Hole Principle, is the aspect of you that's beyond the speed of light. So that aspect of you, and it totally fits with the physics that I subsequently discovered. So all of this creation led to this scientific discovery. And because if I didn't have the time to think and, you know, ponder on things and write the book, you know, who knows what would have happened. So it opened the space for me to make that discovery. And the genius groove is in that discovery as well. It's about us breathing with the universe. So it's not just sitting there and laying back and everything happens now, we're in the groove, you know, that sort of thing. It's following your heart when you really know that you need to do something. And that also is part of the perfection. So, you know, it's surrendering to your higher self, what your higher self and what your true purpose is. But that surrender does not mean inactivity. You know, so you're actually...
So if people don't know what the higher self is, what would you say to them? How can we feel that?
How can you feel it? I think, first of all, it's got to start with your heart. It's got to start with your heart. It's got to start with that inner calling. And having been a GP and seeing that the inner thoughts of many people, you know, these are not people who necessarily would call them spiritual, they're just off the street. I would say that, you know, none of us are immune to if we don't follow our heart. You know, things actually... there is a sense of suffering if we don't do it, and that's for everybody. I worked as a holistic cancer doctor at the Bristol Cancer Help Centre as well, and saw a lot of that, people who pushed their dreams aside, and you know, so I think you know, this sense within. First of all, you've got to quieten the noise around in order to tune into yourself and look at the synchronicities in your life as well. You know, see what it is, how things are flowing. Because the Genius Groove is a different way of living where you're not intellectualizing and saying, okay, now I'm going to do X, Y, Z. It's like feeling into the moment and going, what needs to be birthed now?
Right.
You know, so it's a different way of being. And it doesn't mean inactivity. Sometimes you can be quite busy, but it's part of the flow.
But you also say in your book, and you explain that very beautifully, how emotions also, they are really important to express our emotion, but how we can get stuck in them and therefore not move forward.
I think that's been the most amazing, one of the most amazing parts of the journey, to understand about the integration of emotions. So, excuse me, even in my own journey, as I said, I realised what was happening was the shadow self was coming up to be shown to me, my shadow self, my doubts about my spiritual side, my doubts about my need to be in the box, you know, was having to be exploded really in front of me, and your own judgments of yourself. So by doing this work, the emotional work I did for myself personally, I think, you know, there's lots of different ways to do this. But I was writing, I was journaling, and I would get answers. Answers would come up from within me. And I would be on the computer for hours just trying to find answers of why I felt that way, why things were triggering me, and coming to realizations and about the what was being reflected for me in that moment. So it's a myriad of things, but and I do this work all the time. If something comes up into my life that's bothering me, or, you know, for example, somebody looked at just last week, somebody looked at my one of my YouTube videos and said, well, that's not very scientific, is it? You know, and it started a whole Facebook discussion, and it went on for 100 posts, would you believe it? You know, so but I looked and I actually thought, well, you know, that woman's got a point, because when I was doing that particular talk, I was thinking to myself, I'm condensing things so much that that it can sound a bit unscientific. She was a reflection of the doubt I had in the moment.
Interesting.
So
really,
when I got the lesson of actually that's just she's voicing something I myself was thinking. So when you start to realise that, then you have to ask the question: what is it? Bring it all back to yourself. What is it that's triggering me? What I've noticed is that the more you do this, you know, if you see your whole life like this, like 24/7, 100%, and the more you do this work, and it's, you know, compared to 10 years ago, for some reason it's getting much easier, something will click in your Genius Groove. So once you get the click in your emotions, I mean, literally the next second I would have the phone call, it would be the BBC, or, you know, something extraordinary would happen, the next stage would come in. And, you know, that's from doing the emotional work. So I think through doing that and integrating the emotions, it's not about denying the emotions. A lot of teachers talk about emotions are dirty and don't go there, you know. And the reason why they do that is because it's not that easy to face the dark side of yourself and to take ownership of that. But I tell you something, the more you do it, the easier it gets in a way, because although when you're in the moment, when you're working through some emotional situation, it isn't very pleasant, the big picture, once you start to do this in your life all the time, is that you start to realise that once you get through it, your life, you'll feel so much better, and that your life will move forward. And once you realise that's the key to moving into your true path, it becomes, I mean, sometimes I tell all my friends, actually, I say, especially if I'm making new friends, I say, by the way, if you see me doing any pattern, just tell me. I want to know, because, you know, that I'm not seeing. If you see an unconscious pattern that I'm doing, let me know, because I really want to, you know, heal, and I want to know And so I'm so keen to do that because
Yeah.
I know what happens. You actually move through
Yeah,
it, and
yeah.
your life moves forward.
Yeah.
So it's not about suppressing. It's not about positive thinking.
No,
It's about
no.
integrated thinking.
Yeah. Well, we have about a couple of minutes left, and I know you just finished a movie, a scientific movie. Would you like to say a couple of things about it?
Okay. Thank
What
you.
it is about?
It's a Punk Science the movie.
Yeah.
And we're in post-production with it at the moment, so we're starting on the whole putting together of all the clips. We've gone around the world and we've interviewed some of the real luminaries in the whole cutting-edge science, such as Bruce Lipton, and we've interviewed people like Lynn McTaggart and Dean Radin, and you interviewed Marilyn Schlitz before on this show,
Sure.
haven't you?
Yes. Yeah.
So, and lots of people who are very great, who people might not have heard of in the UK, but they're equally fabulous, like Jazz Razul and Jude Currivan. So it's Punk Science, the movie, and it definitely has a punk feel to it, which I think will
Wonderful.
make Ian right at home. And so we're looking to bring it out next year.
Great. Well, I'm sorry we have to finish. I wanted, actually, I have all these questions about black holes and quantum vacuum and the absolute reality. But that was a wonderful interview. Thank you, Manjir. And thank you for watching Conscious TV, and I hope I see you again soon. Goodbye. Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. My name is Renate McNay, and my guest is still Dr. Manjir Samanta-Laughton. We just finished an interview and we kept talking, and we thought we actually should put that on film because it's a little bit more about the scientific questions I had, which I didn't come to ask her in our interview. So one thing is absolute reality. I know what you say about the black hole principle, and it's fascinating because so far as I understood and knew that everything which comes close to a black hole is gulped up by the black hole. But you actually say there is light coming out. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, it's interesting because black holes, the concept of black holes have come out of Einstein's theory of relativity.
Yes.
And which said that if space-time curvature gets so great, then it can collapse, a star can collapse on itself and become a place of infinite density and infinite gravity, suck everything in.
Yes.
And in the 1960s, somebody called these black holes, you know, the concept you're sucking everything in that comes past the event horizon. Now, black holes remained theoretical concepts for quite a long time. What's happened in the last 10, 15 years or so is we're actually seeing black holes, and through our telescopes, Hubble, etc. But interestingly, they're not behaving as we thought. Mm-hmm. First of all, we're finding them in the centre of every galaxy, and all over galaxies as well. And this is not me saying this is the actual astrophysicists. Mm-hmm. I haven't got a telescope that can do this in my back garden, believe me. And they're also finding them everywhere, and they're also finding that far from being black, they're actually really bright. They're actually spewing out material at the speed of light. And sometimes they're spewing out electrons, sometimes the antimatter, positrons. Sometimes they're spewing out gamma rays, which are formed when antimatter and matter come together and make light. So they can't make sense of it. They eventually, in 2009, they said, okay, guys, we have to admit, black holes must have something to do with creating galaxies. Otherwise, why would we be finding them in every single galaxy? And did you know that the size of the galaxy has a direct proportion to the size of the black hole at the centre?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when they plotted them out, they went, there was an absolute definite relationship. So they realised they had to admit black holes are creative. But it's not quite in the same way that I said in my book in 2006, and I first published in 2003,
Yeah.
when I had a vision and I saw that the reason why the material is coming out of a black hole is not because the black hole sucks it all up and spits it out, or burps, as some of the astrophysics say. Burps, they actually say that black holes burp. But because it's actually coming from beyond our normal vision, beyond our normal measurement, what I'm calling the perception horizon at the speed of light. And I say that actually there's a whole realm of many dimensions beyond the speed of light. That's the realm of mysticism.
Yeah.
So actually what black holes are the creative centres of the universe. You have the infinity at the centre, which is the absolute reality that you're speaking about.
Yes.
And from this absolute reality, we can say it in a spiritual way as well as a scientific way, it differentiates itself because, as many teachers say, what does absolute reality want to do? Learn about itself. How does it do it? It differentiates itself and pretends to be different and separate. So the way it does that, it goes spirals, and the spiral, because Fibonacci, the golden mean, is present throughout all of nature. It spirals throughout all the dimensions, gets to the edge of what we call our reality, and it splits into two, the electron and the positron. The electron is the antimatter. It goes into a kind of mirror world, and the positron is the antimatter. The electron is the matter, and it creates our world. The matter goes on to create our world. So that's where the split happens. That's where the absolute reality splits and pretends to be separate, when actually, ultimately, it's always all one.
Could it, that's interesting with the absolute reality and the object reality, because I had this experience once, and it's almost like the absolute, the breath of the absolute, if you want.
Yeah.
I was in meditation, and I sank so deep, and I was gone.
Wow.
And in spiritual terms, that's called divine coma.
Yeah.
And it was sinking into completely black velvet softness, and then consciousness is gone. And then the coming out was very much, as you say, it spits out matter and matter forms. And I never heard it explained, and now it makes so much sense to me what I experienced.
Well, what's so amazing is that although you've had this amazing experience, we actually have the measurements. So we now can see, even though it's puzzling astrophysicists, all these gamma rays and all these electrons and positrons coming out of these black holes at the speed of light. We actually can measure that. Yeah. And you talk about the breath of the absolute. The whole thing is breathing. Yeah. 1 minute it breathes one way, and the next minute the antimatter and matter combine again to form a gamma ray burst. Yeah. So this is the breath of Brahma. And we can measure that breathing in our own galaxy. The astrophysicists don't know why this is happening, but if you understand the black hole principle, you'd predict the breath, the in and out. You actually can see the breath happening even in our own galaxy. This is what you've experienced, we can now measure. So science and spirituality is now coming together in the most amazing way.
Yes. Well, another thing which puzzles me is we know object reality doesn't really exist. Yeah, it's mainly what we are looking at in perceiving as chair or clock or table is mainly empty space. So if this space doesn't exist, also I can knock on it, then that says also I don't exist. And so what does the hearing? What has the experience? What does the listening? That is something which really puzzles me. Is there an explanation for that?
Well, what we call existence is what is below the speed of light. So when that light splits at the perception horizon into the charged particles, it can create things like this. How is this held together? Through charge.
Right.
So when things are below the speed of light, that's where we get what we call objects. Ultimately, though, they're all part of the one light. The matter and the antimatter are actually, ultimately, they cancel out. You know, if you go up to the higher dimensions, they actually cancel out. But you are both here and not here at the same time. Yeah. You are both the absolute and the differentiation at the same time. The black hole principle gives a way of scientifically explaining what mystics have been experiencing the whole time, that they have a body, but they dissolve in meditation, because they're experiencing, you know, more of the ultimate reality. And that ultimate reality is the center of the black hole. And in my theory, I say that everything follows the same principle, and the book, you have to read the book to actually see all the references, from atoms to even chakras. You know, I get into trouble talking about chakras, but why not? It's the same principle as part of Indian knowledge, you know.
There is, even in Sufism, there is something below or beyond the chakra system, which is called the Lataifa, which are the door gates, just like the chakras are the energy points in the physical body. The Lataifas are the door gates, the points, or you would say the black hole, into our essence, and into who we are.
And why not? Because these mystics have had an observation. The scientific method starts with observation. And if a mystic has had an observation, for me that's equally valid. You know, so over the years, many people have observed things like chakras, but we're not just talking about chakras, we're talking about solar flares, we're talking about Jupiter flares, we're talking about the fact that stars like red dwarfs that are supposed to be quiescent are giving off bipolar jets. We're talking about the mechanism behind terrestrial gamma ray flashes in our Earth's upper atmosphere, the mechanism behind lightning. At every single level is doing the same principle. But the interesting thing, to answer your question, is that at every single center of every single fractal black hole, everything is, at every level, black holes on black holes, is that undifferentiated center of a black hole, the sort of eye of the storm, you know, that's the same. And that center of a black hole is the same center, you know, no matter where. The whole of the universe has the same central black hole.
I just feel excited about that.
So that's the absolute reality, that undifferentiated. But you know, that it decided for some reason in consciousness differentiate itself, pretend to be separate, and that's the bit that's below the speed of light, that's got charge, that's got mass, all of that. But it's all a game.
It's great. You just gave me a piece of a puzzle. Well, anyway. And one more question. You talk in your newsletter about we are meeting our antimatter selves this year. So what our antimatter selves, antimatter selves, and why this year?
Well, the black hole principle goes in your own life as well. So we're talking about the science, the emotional journey we go on. We meet something that may be bothering us or whatever, and we have to look within. Because what it's doing is mirroring our subconscious emotions. Now, what I think is happening is that you're actually doing the same as a black hole. You've got your matter, your antimatter. When you get that aha moment, you know, when you go, oh, that's why that happened. That's when you get the moment that goes into the matter and antimatter come together in light. You no longer have any polarity about that situation. You no longer have any charge. That person doesn't bother you anymore. You got what that was all about. And you move into a centered space. And you move into that, like, you know, for a moment life is wonderful, you know. And then you're expansive, you're heart-based. And then you move on to the next situation. So that's where the matter and the antimatter are moving and breathing in your own life. And so when I say you're meeting your antimatter self, it's because you're meeting the shadow subconscious self, that aspect of your emotion that is coming up to heal. And I think we're doing that big time in 2012 because, you know, as we're entering this year, a lot of people are speaking about, gosh, it does feel different. You know, keeping an open mind, but as we're entering this year, the things do seem to be changing. And so we're really seeing, you know, the polarities coming together, and maybe there's going to be some interesting event later on.
Wow, it's all a big mystery. You know, I got on Facebook a little note this morning from a group, and there was, I know you know Brian Swim.
Yes.
Yeah, and somebody asked him if he can explain shortly what this evolution is about, or the scope of this evolution. And he said, oh, that's very simple. You just take hydrogen gas and leave it alone, and it starts forming rose bushes and giraffes and humans. Isn't it amazing? Yeah. Okay, Manjir, thank you for giving me another 15 minutes. And I just want to show your books again. So that's Punk Science, Inside the Mind of God. And the interview we did today, earlier, was In the Genius Groove. It's a fascinating book, and I know it will bring you in your own genius groove if you just read through it. And thank you for watching Conscious TV. Goodbye. Goodbye, Manjir.
Thank you.